While a homeless man was begging on the streets, a well-dressed man, accompanied by what seemed to be his daughter, passed by. Unexpectedly, the little girl suddenly stopped in her tracks, took a $1 bill out of her dress pocket, and tossed it into the man's begging cup. At first, he didn't think much of it, and was simply grateful for the kind gesture. But when he later counted his earnings and took a closer look at the bill, he noticed something unusual. In that moment, he realized this wasn't just a random act of kindness, and he knew he had to act fast. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Nathan Lane stood at his usual spot in the bustling business district, his weathered hands clutching a cardboard sign that had seen better days. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk, highlighting the stark contrast between the well-dressed professionals hurrying by and Nathan's worn, threadbare clothing. At 53 years old, Nathan had become a fixture in this part of the city. His unkempt beard and tired eyes spoke of years spent on the streets, a far cry from the life he once knew. As he watched the endless stream of people pass by, he couldn't help but reflect on the cruel irony of his situation. Here he was, surrounded by wealth and success, yet invisible to most who walked past. The tower clock on the distant town hall building chimed 5 p.m., its resonant tones barely audible over the cacophony of city life. Nathan knew that in an hour the streets would be flooded with even more people as the workday ended and the rush hour began. It was a time of both opportunity and challenge for him, more potential donors, but also more chances to be jostled, kicked, and ignored. As he contemplated the approaching evening, a small figure caught his eye. A little girl, no more than 4 or 5 years old, was walking hand in hand with a man who could only be her father. The man exuded an air of success, from his perfectly tailored navy suit and designer's shoes to his confident stride. Nathan estimated him to be in his mid to late 30s, the picture of a young, ambitious professional. The girl was a vision of innocence in her pink dress, her small hand engulfed by her father's larger one. Nathan found himself smiling at the sight, a rare moment of warmth in his often harsh existence. But his smile faded as he noticed 2 young women approaching from the opposite direction. The women's giggles carried on the air as they passed the man and his daughter. Nathan watched as the father's eyes met theirs, a subtle but unmistakable exchange taking place. The flirtatious glances were brief but loaded with meaning, and Nathan felt a pang of disappointment. He sighed heavily, shaking his head at the scene before him. Some people, he muttered to himself, they just don't understand karma. The words were barely audible, lost in the ambient noise of the city, but they carried the weight of Nathan's own experiences and regrets. As Nathan wrestled with his thoughts, the little girl suddenly broke away from her father's grasp. With a determined look on her face, she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded dollar bill. Before anyone could react, she tossed it into Nathan's begging cup with surprising accuracy. The girl stood still for a moment, her eyes locked with Nathan's. There was a wisdom in her gaze that seemed beyond her years. She pointed at the cup, her small finger indicating the bill she had just deposited, as if trying to convey a message that her limited vocabulary couldn't express. Nathan felt a lump form in his throat. It had been a long time since anyone had shown him such pure, unguarded kindness. He nodded his head in acknowledgement, a genuine smile spreading across his face. But before he could voice his gratitude, the girl's father noticed her absence. "Come, baby," the man called, his voice tinged with impatience. He glanced around, spotting his daughter near Nathan. A look of displeasure crossed his face as he quickly closed the distance between them. "Why did you stop?" he asked, reaching for her hand. "These homeless people are dangerous. We need to keep walking." The girl reluctantly allowed herself to be led away, but her eyes remained fixed on Nathan. Her father, noticing her continued interest, decided to use the moment as a teaching opportunity. "Ah, darling," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Well, since you're looking at him, take a closer look. Do you see how dirty he looks? I bet there are lice under that man's hat and beard. He never bathes or shaves. Isn't it scary?" Nathan felt the all-too-familiar sting of shame and anger at the man's words, but he kept his expression unreadable. After all, it was true. He had lice. And though the admission filled him with embarrassment, he had long since learned that reacting would only make things worse. Instead, he held the girl's gaze, silently willing her to look past her father's cruelty. After a moment, the girl nodded almost imperceptibly to her father, though her eyes held a hint of uncertainty. Encouraged, the father continued his impromptu lesson. "You, my baby, I'll make sure you will never become like that person," he declared. "That's why Daddy and Mommy must work, so we don't become losers and burdens to society like him." As the man spoke, his eyes met Nathan's, and the contempt in them was unmistakable. Nathan held the gaze, refusing to be cowed, even as the familiar pain of such encounters washed over him. He had endured countless such insults over the years, each one a reminder of how far he had fallen, and how harshly the world could judge. The father-daughter duo had barely taken a few steps when the little girl's voice piped up, cutting through the ambient noise of the busy street. "But Dad," she said, her childish tone filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern, "the man looks hungry. Should we help him?" Nathan, who had been lost in his own thoughts, perked up at the sound of her voice. The sincerity and purity in her words stood in stark contrast to her father's earlier remarks, and it touched something deep within him, hope for humanity. The father, however, seemed irritated by his daughter's suggestion. "People who don't work don't deserve to eat," he said firmly, his voice carrying a note of finality that brooked no argument. But the little girl wasn't so easily dissuaded. "But Mommy said we should help hungry people," she countered, her brow furrowing in confusion at the conflicting messages she was receiving. The father's expression darkened for a moment before he forced a smile. "Ah, I see. You must have learned those ideas from your mum," he said, his tone condescending. "You see, your mum is actually wrong about this, honey. It's good that you're now with me, where you will learn how to actually live correctly." He paused, glancing back at Nathan with disdain before continuing. "If you keep listening to Mum's words and giving food away to all hungry people, you'll only end up like that man." Nathan felt another wave of shame wash over him at the man's words, but it was quickly followed by a deep sadness. He couldn't help but think about how different his life had once been. If only they knew, he thought to himself, that he had once been a successful, aspiring journalist. He had been on the cusp of breaking major stories, of making a real difference in the world. But then tragedy struck. One of the cases he had been covering had gone terribly wrong. He had gotten entangled with a corrupt white-collar criminal, and the fallout had cost him everything: his family, his wealth, his reputation, all gone in what felt like the blink of an eye. Unconsciously, Nathan reached up to rub his right ear, feeling the small bump of the hearing aid hidden beneath his hat. It was a constant reminder of the price he had paid for his dedication to uncovering the truth. The device had been given to him long ago, and he was grateful that it still worked, helping him navigate a world that had become increasingly hostile. As Nathan watched the father and daughter walk away, he reflected on how his experiences had shaped his view of the world. Throughout his time as a journalist, a spy, and now a homeless beggar, he had encountered all kinds of people. Many of the wealthy and successful saw themselves as superior, a harsh reality he had come to accept. Yet his thoughts lingered on the little girl. Would she remember this moment? Would her father's words shape her view of the less fortunate, or would her own small act of kindness leave a deeper impression? Only time would tell. For now, Nathan was left alone once more, the folded dollar bill in his cup a bittersweet reminder of the complexity of human nature. He continued to watch as the pair disappeared into a nearby business building, greeted by a guard and a female staff member at the entrance. Nathan caught a glimpse of the respect and deference shown to the man, confirming his suspicion that he must hold a high position, perhaps even ownership of the company. It was exactly the type of person who often looked down on the homeless, viewing them as less than human. As the glass doors shut behind them, Nathan let out a heavy sigh. The rising chill in the air signaled that it might be time to move to one of his other spots. He gathered his meager belongings, preparing to leave, when suddenly the office building's doors swung open again far sooner than he had expected. The father and daughter emerged, still hand in hand, but this time they were accompanied by a woman in a crisp white blazer and smart pants, her heels clicking against the pavement. Behind them followed a man in a black suit who bore all the hallmarks of a security guard. At first, Nathan assumed the man in black was a family bodyguard, but as he watched more closely, he noticed something off about the situation. The security guard had a firm grip on the woman's arm, subtly but forcefully pulling her along to keep pace with the others. The woman's body language spoke volumes. She was tense, her movements stilted and unwilling. It was clear that whatever was happening, she was not a willing participant. As Nathan watched the scene unfold, an unsettling feeling lingered. His instincts, sharpened by years of investigative work, told him there was more to this family dynamic than met the eye. But what could he, a homeless man on the street, possibly understand about them? The group made their way towards a sleek black limousine parked in front of the office building. A chauffeur stood at attention by the car's door, ready to welcome them inside. Nathan watched intently, unable to shake the feeling that he was witnessing something he shouldn't be. Suddenly, a commotion erupted just outside the car. The woman in the white blazer, who had been quietly compliant until now, suddenly began to struggle against the security guard's grip. She wriggled and twisted, managing to loosen his hold on her arm. "Let me go," she screamed, her voice carrying across the street, "or I'll make a scene so everyone will look." Nathan's eyes widened at the outburst. He noticed pedestrians beginning to pause and watch the unfolding drama. Even though it wasn't quite rush hour yet, there were still enough people around to draw attention to the situation. The rich man, the father, reacted quickly. He handed his daughter over to the chauffeur, who promptly helped the little girl into the limousine. Then, with a calm that seemed at odds with the situation, he turned to the security guard. "Let her be," he said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. Then, addressing the woman directly, he continued, "You don't have to come. But remember, if you don't, you probably won't see your daughter again." His tone was matter-of-fact, almost casual, as if he were discussing the weather rather than making a threat. "I have custody, you don't. If you want to see your daughter, you do exactly what I say." The woman's face contorted with a mix of anger and desperation, but she didn't move towards the car. Nathan could see the internal struggle playing out across her features, the desire to be with her child, warring against whatever was keeping her from complying with the man's demands. The rich man seemed to grow impatient. He turned to the security guard again. "Don't worry about her," he said dismissively. "It's only a matter of time." Nathan found himself hearing every word clearly, grateful for the hearing aid that allowed him to pick up details that might otherwise have been lost in the bustle of the street. He noticed that the other pedestrians, while curious, didn't seem to be reacting strongly to the confrontation. Perhaps they couldn't hear as clearly, or perhaps they were choosing not to get involved in the domestic scene. As Nathan watched the scene unfold, he suddenly found himself locking eyes with the rich man. The man's expression changed instantly, morphing from cool indifference to barely contained rage. With purposeful strides, he crossed the distance between them. "Why the hell are you looking?" he growled, his voice dangerously low as he got closer to him. Nathan remained silent, unsure how to respond. The man's face twisted with disgust, and before Nathan could react, he spat directly in his face. "This is none of your business," the man hissed, his eyes blazing with anger. He gave Nathan one last furious look before turning on his heel and striding back to the car. Nathan watched, stunned, as the man climbed into the limousine. The chauffeur closed the door with a soft thud and quickly made his way to the driver's seat. Within moments, the sleek black car was pulling away from the curb, leaving behind a wake of tension and unanswered questions. As the limousine disappeared around a corner, Nathan found himself frozen in place, his mind reeling from what he had just witnessed. The glob of spit on his face served as a visceral reminder of the encounter, but it was the memory of the woman's desperate eyes and the little girl's confused expression that truly haunted him. With a heavy sigh, Nathan used the sleeve of his worn jacket to wipe the spit from his face. He looked down at his begging cup, the folded dollar bill from the little girl still visible among the sparse change. Somehow that small act of kindness now seemed like it belonged to a different world entirely. The woman in the white blazer stood alone on the sidewalk, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the bustling city. Her head was bowed, and she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her composed exterior crumbling in the wake of the confrontation. Nathan watched as she took a deep breath, seeming to gather herself before she began to walk away from the spot where the limousine had been. As she approached Nathan, her steps slowed. She paused in front of him, her head still lowered, avoiding eye contact. With trembling hands, she reached into her purse and pulled out a pocket-sized tissue pack. Instead of taking just a single sheet, she held out the entire pack to Nathan. "Sorry for my husband," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the street. Nathan was taken aback by this unexpected gesture of kindness, especially coming on the heels of such a tense situation. He accepted the tissue pack with a murmur of thanks, studying the woman's face. Despite her attempts to hide it, he could see the redness around her eyes and the slight tremor in her lips. "Are you okay?" Nathan asked, his concern genuine. The question seemed to catch the woman off guard. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the personal nature of the inquiry. Her eyes darted around as if checking to see if anyone was watching their interaction. Instead of answering, she diverted the subject. "I don't have any cash, but take this," she said, reaching into her purse once more. This time, she pulled out a grain bar snack. With surprising firmness, she pressed it into Nathan's hand, her other hand coming up to support his wrist, as if to ensure he wouldn't refuse. Before Nathan could say anything else, the woman was already moving away, her heels clicking rapidly on the pavement as she half walked, half ran towards a waiting taxi. In a matter of moments, she had disappeared into the vehicle, leaving Nathan standing there with a tissue pack in one hand and a grain bar in the other. As the taxi pulled away, Nathan found himself pondering the strange series of events. He thought back to what the little girl had said earlier, about her mom teaching her to share food with hungry people. It seemed the apple hadn't fallen far from the tree in terms of compassion. Nathan concluded that perhaps the conflict he had witnessed was just that, a family disagreement, albeit an intense one. The stark difference in personality between the husband and wife was evident, and it wasn't hard to imagine how that could lead to tension. Glancing down at the items in his hands, Nathan felt a mix of emotions: gratitude for the unexpected gifts, confusion about the situation he had witnessed, and a lingering sense of unease. He carefully tucked the tissue pack and the grain bar into his jacket pocket, treating them as precious commodities in his world of scarcity. The clock tower in the distance caught his eye once more. It was now 5:40 p.m. The rush hour was approaching, and Nathan knew from experience that it would be wise to move before the sidewalks became crowded with commuters heading home. Being homeless during rush hour often meant being treated as an obstacle rather than a human being. With a sigh, Nathan bent down to pick up his begging container. He figured he should count his earnings and see what he could afford for dinner before the evening rush made every food establishment in the area busy and less welcoming to someone like him. Nathan's fingers, calloused from years on the street but still nimble, moved methodically through the collection of bills and coins in his begging cup. The organizational skills ingrained in him from his days as a journalist hadn't faded, even after all these years. As he sorted through his meager earnings, his eyes fell upon the dollar bill at the very top, the one the little girl had given him earlier. The bill stood out from the rest, crisp and clean, still neatly folded. Nathan couldn't help but smile at the thought of a child that age carrying around small bills in her pocket. He imagined it was a family tradition, perhaps meant to teach her about money or to allow her the independence to buy a small treat now and then. Curiosity getting the better of him, Nathan gently unfolded the bill. As he did, he noticed something unusual, a red, sad smile drawn on the face of the note. He ran his thumb over the marking, and it smeared slightly, leaving a faint red stain on his skin. The texture and color made him think it might be crayon, or perhaps lipstick. "Well," Nathan mused to himself, a small chuckle escaping his lips, "if anyone won't accept it, I'll just keep it." The thought of the little girl secretly decorating dollar bills brought a warmth to his heart that he hadn't felt in a long time. Returning his attention to the task at hand, Nathan continued counting the rest of his earnings. By the time he finished, He had tallied up a total of $9.70. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get him through another night. With the rush hour approaching, Nathan knew he needed to move quickly. He gathered his belongings and made his way to his sleeping spot, located at the mouth of an alley near his begging area. The spot offered some protection from the elements, thanks to an overhanging awning, and was just far enough from the main walkway to provide a modicum of privacy. After depositing his cardboard sign and begging cup near his sleeping bag, Nathan set off down the block. His mind was on food, specifically a slice of pizza and a bottle of water. He had learned long ago to budget carefully, planning to save whatever he could for leaner times. As he walked, Nathan found his thoughts drifting back to the events of the afternoon. He pulled out the dollar bill with the sad smile again, studying it closely. The simple drawing seemed to take on new meaning as he recalled the family drama he had witnessed. The man's cruel words echoed in his mind, contrasting sharply with the little girl's act of kindness. Then there was the scene with the wife, the security guard gripping her arm, the thinly veiled threats. All of it played out in front of the child, even if she had been in the car for part of it. Nathan's steps slowed as he approached the pizza place, his appetite suddenly diminished by the weight of his thoughts. He joined the short line, grateful that the rush hadn't started yet, but his mind was elsewhere. When his turn came to order, Nathan surprised himself. Instead of asking for his usual slice, he found himself apologizing to the cashier and walking away. The unsettling feeling in his gut had grown too strong to ignore. Standing on the sidewalk outside the pizza place, Nathan looked down at the dollar bill again. The sad smile seemed to stare back at him, a silent cry for help. He thought about the little girl, about the tension between her parents, about the fear he had seen in the mother's eyes. Years of experience as a journalist had taught Nathan to trust his instincts. He had seen and reported on countless family conflicts, some of which had ended tragically. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that what he had witnessed was more than just a typical disagreement. For a man to berate his wife in public, to use their child as leverage to have a security guard manhandle her, these were red flags that he shouldn't ignore. His mind raced with possibilities, each scenario more troubling than the last. With a deep breath, Nathan made a decision. He knew there was a police station nearby, just a few blocks away. Even if it turned out to be nothing, he felt compelled to report what he had seen. At the very least, it would ease his conscience to know he had done something. As he set off towards the police station, the memory of the little girl's kindness and the mother's fear spurred him on. He may be homeless, he may be viewed as invisible by most of society, but he still had a voice, and right now he felt an overwhelming need to use it. Nathan approached the police station with a mix of determination and trepidation. The building loomed before him, its facade a stark contrast to the worn storefronts and residential buildings that surrounded it. As he pushed open the heavy glass door, the fluorescent lights of the lobby washed over him, highlighting the stark reality of his appearance. The young officer at the reception desk looked up as Nathan entered, his eyes widening in surprise. In an instant, the officer was on his feet, his hand instinctively moving towards his belt. "Sir, you can't be in here," the officer said, his voice a mix of authority and unease. "Your attire, it's not appropriate. What do you want?" Nathan took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. "I need to report something important," he said, his voice steady despite the officer's hostile reception. The young man hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting between Nathan and the door. Finally, with visible reluctance, he stepped out from behind the desk. "Fine," he said, "but I'm going to have to accompany you to the waiting room." As they walked, Nathan could feel the officer's eyes on him, watching his every move. The waiting room was small and sterile, with hard plastic chairs lining the walls. To Nathan's surprise, there was a small table in the corner, with a coffee machine and a basket of apples. "Help yourself," the officer said, gesturing towards the refreshments. "Someone will be with you shortly." Nathan nodded his thanks, gratefully accepting an apple and pouring himself a cup of coffee. The warmth of the cup in his hands was comforting, a small luxury he rarely experienced these days. He had barely taken a sip when another officer entered the room. This one was older, with greying hair at his temples and a paunch that spoke of too many hours behind a desk. "What is it you want to report?" the older officer asked, his tone brusque and impatient. Nathan began to recount what he had witnessed earlier that day. He described the confrontation between the wealthy man and his wife, the involvement of the security guard, and the apparent distress of the little girl. As he spoke, he pulled out the dollar bill, explaining the sad face drawn on it and his suspicions about what it might mean. As he finished his account, Nathan looked up at the officer, expecting to see concern or at least interest. Instead, he was met with a loud, derisive laugh. "Is this some kind of joke?" the officer asked, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. "Or are you drunk? What you're saying about this dollar bill is ridiculous." Nathan felt his face flush with embarrassment and anger. "I'm not drunk," he protested, "and I'm not making this up. I really think something is wrong." The officer's amusement faded, replaced by a look of annoyance. "Listen," he said, his voice hard. "I don't know if you're just looking for a free coffee and snack or what, but don't make this a habit. Next time, come with a real report or don't come at all, otherwise—" The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Before Nathan could say another word, he found himself being escorted out of the station, the door closing firmly behind him. Standing on the sidewalk outside, Nathan felt a surge of anger and frustration. He had tried to do the right thing, to speak up for those who couldn't speak for themselves, and he had been dismissed and mocked for his efforts. The sky had darkened while he was in the station, and the rush hour was nearing its end. With a heavy heart, he made his way back to his sleeping spot at the mouth of the alley near his usual begging area. The apple and cup of coffee from the station earlier were in his hand as he absently fidgeted with the smooth, round surface of the apple. As Nathan reached the alley and his sleeping bag, he settled in for the night. Wrapping himself inside the bag while still in a seated position, he finished the apple from the station and took a few sips of the now cold coffee before setting the cup down at the corner of the wall. He remembered the granola bar the woman had given him earlier and decided to save it for breakfast, a small comfort to look forward to in the morning. With his stomach as full as it was going to get, Nathan closed his eyes and turned his back to the street, pressing his face against the rough texture of the brick wall. As he drifted off to sleep, his mind was still churning with the events of the day. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed somehow, that by not being believed, he had let down that little girl and her mother. Nathan drifted into a fitful sleep, the passage of time slipping away unnoticed as evening turned to night. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by the loud roar of a car engine in his right ear. His eyes snapped open, and his body tensed instinctively as Nathan touched the hearing aid on his ear. Years on the street had taught him to stay alert to potential danger, even in his sleep. Nathan shifted his position, now facing the street, squinting against the harsh glare of headlights that flooded his small corner of the alley. As the lights dimmed, he recognized the sleek black limousine from earlier that day. For a moment, he wondered if he was dreaming, the events of the afternoon blending with his subconscious fears. But as he watched the man and the security guard step out of the car, glancing at their watches and scanning the area, Nathan knew this was all too real. His first thought was that they were looking for him. After all, the man had been clearly displeased when he had overheard their earlier confrontation. Fear gripped Nathan's heart. What if they had come to silence him, to ensure he wouldn't speak about what he had seen? The fact that they were here, late in the evening with a bodyguard, seemed to confirm his worst suspicions. Instinctively, Nathan sank deeper into his sleeping bag, burying his face and trying to make himself as small and still as possible. He held his breath, straining to hear any approaching footsteps over the sound of his own pounding heart. But then another sound caught his attention, the distinctive purr of a taxi engine. Risking a peek, Nathan saw a yellow cab pull up behind the limousine. To his surprise, the woman in the white blazer, the same one from earlier, stepped out. Confusion replaced fear in Nathan's mind. What was she doing here? And why was she meeting these men again in the late hour after the earlier confrontation? As he watched, trying to make sense of the scene unfolding before him, he realized that they weren't here for him after all. He was just an accidental witness once again. Nathan kept his body still, his face mostly hidden by the sleeping bag. Through the hazy layers of fabric, he could make out blurry movements as the rich man approached the woman. Their voices carried clearly in the quiet night air, amplified by Nathan's hearing aid. "I told you she would eventually give in," the rich man said, his tone smug and self-satisfied. Nathan saw the man turn, scanning the area once more. His gaze lingered on Nathan's old begging spot, now empty. Nathan silently thanked whatever instinct had led him to move to this more secluded location for the night. After a tense moment, Nathan risked peeking out a bit more from his sleeping bag. He saw the security guard grab the woman by her arm, his grip firm and threatening. "No games this time," the guard warned, his voice low but clear in the night air. The guard and the rich man guided the woman towards the limousine. By the open door, the man pulled out some papers on a clipboard and a pen. "Sign," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Nathan could hear every word, every sigh, even the soft rustle of clothing as they moved. His hearing aid picked up details that would have been lost to most people, allowing him to paint a vivid mental picture of the scene even with his limited view. The scratching of pen on paper seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet night. Nathan saw the woman return the clipboard and pen to the man, her movements stiff and reluctant. "Can I see Vivian now?" the woman asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Can I get her tomorrow morning and take her to my place to live with me?" The rich man's laughter was cold and cruel. "Did you really think I would let you see her again?" he asked, his tone mocking. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine at the man's words. The situation was clearly more sinister than he had initially thought. His heart raced as he watched the rich man gesture to the security guard. In one swift motion, the guard grabbed the woman by her arm and began dragging her towards the alley, where Nathan lay hidden. The woman struggled against his grip, her cries for help muffled by the guard's large hand clamped firmly over her mouth. Panic surged through Nathan's body. He quickly buried his entire face and head inside the sleeping bag, desperately trying not to move or make a sound. His mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Would they discover him? What would they do if they found a witness to their actions? Through the layers of his sleeping bag, Nathan could make out blurry movements and muffled sounds again. Suddenly, a loud thump echoed through the alley, followed by the unmistakable sound of a body hitting the ground. Nathan's blood ran cold. He recognized those sounds all too well from his days as a spy and journalist. They were the sounds of violence, of a story taking a dark and dangerous turn. "Wipe your hand," Nathan heard the rich man say, his voice unnaturally calm given the situation. Risking a quick peek, Nathan saw the security guard wiping his gloved hands with a towel provided by the rich man. Then, to his horror, he watched as the guard pulled out a syringe, filled it with an unknown substance and injected it into the woman's arm. Nathan's mind reeled. This was no longer just a family dispute or a custody battle. This was something far more sinister, possibly even criminal. He watched, helpless and hidden, as the two men returned to the car and drove away, leaving the woman lying motionless in the alley. For a moment, Nathan remained frozen, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would give him away. But as the sound of the limousine faded into the distance, he knew he had to act. This woman needed help, and he was the only one who could provide it. Emerging from his sleeping bag, Nathan rushed to the woman's side. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. With shaking hands, he searched her white blazer, finding her phone in one of the pockets. Nathan didn't own a phone himself, so this was a stroke of luck. Without hesitation, he dialed 911. As soon as the dispatcher answered, Nathan began speaking rapidly, his words tumbling out in a rush of urgency. "Please, I need help," he said, his voice trembling. "There's a woman here. She's been attacked and is now unconscious. I saw everything. They injected her with something. Please send an ambulance quickly." The dispatcher's calm voice helped steady Nathan, as she assured him help was on the way. She asked for more details about the location and the woman's condition, which Nathan provided as best he could. As he waited for the ambulance to arrive, Nathan stayed by the woman's side, watching her chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. He couldn't help but think about how quickly life could change. Just hours ago, this woman had shown him kindness, offering him tissues and a snack. Now here she was, lying on the ground. Soon the wail of sirens pierced the night air, growing louder as they approached. Nathan felt a mix of relief and anxiety as the flashing lights of police cars and an ambulance illuminated the dark alley. He stood up slowly, his joints stiff from the cold ground, and waved his arms to guide the first responders to their location. The scene quickly transformed into a flurry of activity. Paramedics rushed to the woman's side, their movements swift and practiced. Nathan watched as they assessed her condition, their voices a mix of urgent commands and medical jargon that he couldn't fully understand. "Possible overdose," one paramedic called out. "We need to stabilize her and move quickly." Nathan kept his eyes fixed on the woman as the paramedics worked. They attached monitors, inserted an IV, and carefully lifted her onto a stretcher. Her face, pale and slack, was a stark contrast to the determined expressions of those working to save her life. As the paramedics prepared to load the woman into the ambulance, a police officer approached Nathan and introduced himself as Detective Reeves. The detective's face was a mask of professional concern, but Nathan could see the hint of suspicion in his eyes. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us to the hospital," the detective said. "We'll need to take your statement about what happened here." Nathan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Of course," he managed to say. "I want to help in any way I can." The detective guided Nathan to a police car, opening the back door for him. As Nathan settled into the seat, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of irony. How many times had he seen people being placed into police cars, never imagining he'd be one of them? The drive to the hospital was a blur of city lights and tense silence. Nathan's mind raced, replaying the events of the night over and over. He worried about the woman, hoping that the swift action of the paramedics had been enough to save her life. When they arrived at the hospital, the emergency room was a hive of activity. Nathan watched as the woman was rushed through the doors, surrounded by a team of medical professionals shouting instructions and updates. "We need to run a full tox screen," a doctor called out, "and get that injection site swabbed for analysis." Nathan found himself ushered to a waiting area, the same detective still by his side. The antiseptic smell of the hospital and the harsh fluorescent lighting made everything feel surreal, as if he had stepped into another world entirely. Time seemed to drag on as Nathan waited for news. He answered Detective Reeves' questions as clearly as he could, recounting every detail of what he had witnessed, starting from the first time he saw the man walk with the girl. The detective's pen moved swiftly across the notepad, documenting Nathan's words with precise attention. He made radio contact for any updates on the investigation on the scene. Another officer from behind the radio crackled and said that they had found the woman's wallet on the ground and she was identified as Isabel Navarro. When they relayed the information to the system to check the woman's background, the result came almost instantly, revealing that she was the ex-wife of Vincent Montserrat and the mother of Vivian Montserrat. Isabel was the owner of Novaris Dermaceuticals, a prominent medical skincare empire, specializing in advanced anti-aging and dermatological treatments that blend biotechnology and dermatology. Vincent had been married to her for 5 years before they divorced last year. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor emerged from behind the curtain where they had been treating the woman. His face showed signs of fatigue, but there was relief in his eyes as he approached Nathan and the officers. "She's stable," the doctor announced. "We managed to flush her system and counteract the effects of the drug in time. It was a close call, but she's going to make it." Nathan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He sagged against the wall, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. The adrenaline that had been keeping him going was starting to wear off, leaving him feeling drained and vulnerable. The doctor turned to Nathan, his expression softening slightly. "You saved her life," he said. "If you hadn't called for help when you did, we might be having a very different conversation right now." The detective stepped forward. "Doctor, when can we speak with her?" The doctor glanced toward the curtained area. "She's conscious and alert now. The blood test results just came back. It was fentanyl, a potent opioid, and there was an overdose in her system. We've managed to stabilize her and she's strong enough to talk if necessary, but keep it brief. She still needs rest." With a nod from the doctor, The detective led the way to Isabel's bedside. Nathan followed, his heart pounding with a mix of relief and apprehension. Isabel lay on the hospital bed, looking pale but alert. Her eyes widened as she saw Nathan, recognition and gratitude flooding her face. "You," she said softly, "you saved my life." Nathan nodded, unable to find words to express the tumult of emotions he was feeling. Detective Reeves cleared her throat gently. "Ms. Navarro, I know this is difficult, but we need to ask you some questions about what happened tonight." Isabel took a deep breath, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. "I'll tell you everything," she said, her voice gaining strength. "About Vincent, about our daughter, about the company. Anything you need to know." As Isabel began her story, Nathan listened intently. She spoke of her relationship with Vincent Montseri, how Novartis Dermaceuticals had been her family's legacy, and how things had slowly shifted after she married him and he became involved in the company's management. Vincent had grown controlling and paranoid, especially after Isabel uncovered discrepancies in the company's accounts. The sterile clinical scent of the hospital room hung in the air as Isabel recounted her life with Vincent. Her voice trembled, but grew steadier as she continued, revealing the depth of the manipulation that had overtaken her marriage. "When I started questioning things, that's when it all changed." Her eyes darkened, but she held Nathan's gaze as though to seek some unspoken reassurance. "He drugged me, set me up, got me arrested so he could take custody of everything, my company, my daughter, my life." Detective Reeves stood by with a professional detachment, taking down every word Isabel said. Meanwhile, the nurse and doctor stood by, keeping an eye on the proceedings. Isabel, exhausted yet determined, glanced toward them. "Today he threatened me," Isabel said, her voice breaking slightly. "Said he'd take Vivian away for good and won't let me see her if I didn't hand over the company to him. Tonight, he forced me to sign over my shares in the company. He said it was the only way I'd ever see Vivian again." Detective Reeves leaned forward. "Ms. Navarro, we need to ask, do you believe Vivian is in immediate danger?" Isabel's face paled even further. "Yes," she whispered. "Vincent, he's not stable, and if he thinks I've talked to the police—" Isabel couldn't finish his sentence, but then added, Please, you must send a unit to Vincent's house," she told Detective Reeves. "It's the address on the papers I signed. You'll find everything there." Detective Reeves gave a quick nod and immediately called for a team to head to Vincent's house. But Isabel wasn't done yet. With resolve in her eyes, she turned to the detective. "I need to go to the station. I believe I'm strong enough, and I have to be with my daughter. She'll be alone and scared when they take Vincent." She then glanced at the medical team, her plea silent but clear. "Please, doctor." After a brief discussion with the nurse and doctor, who reluctantly agreed but warned her to return to the hospital if any symptoms appeared within the next 72 hours, Isabel was cleared to leave the hospital under police escort, accompanied by Nathan. As they stepped into the cool evening air, the gravity of everything that had unfolded began to sink in. At the station, Nathan could feel the tension in the air as officers milled about, processing the case. Isabel sat stiffly, but Nathan could tell she was relieved to be one step closer to getting her daughter back. But before they could even settle into the quiet of the station, the door opened again. Officers led Vincent and the same bodyguard in black suit into the room, their face twisted in a snarl, especially Vincent. His handcuffs clinked against the metal as he was escorted toward the booking area. For a split second, his eyes met Isabel's. A flash of fury ignited in his gaze. "How is this possible?" "You should be dead," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. But as he caught sight of Nathan standing nearby, his anger boiled over. His eyes widened with realization. "You," he spat, "this is your doing, isn't it?" Nathan stood still, his heart pounding at the sight of Vincent. The man's face was contorted with rage, and for a moment Nathan wondered if he would try to lunge, but the officers held him back, pushing him forward into the booking room and stay quiet. Vivian was brought in next, escorted by a couple of officers. The young girl clutched a small drawing pad to her chest, her wide eyes searching the room before landing on her mother. Isabel's heart softened at the sight of her daughter, her expression a mix of relief and concern. The officer guiding Vivian led her over to Isabel. The child handed over the pad, and Isabel gasped softly as she saw the drawing. A small dollar bill with a sad smile drawn on it in vibrant red. Isabel's heart tightened, but she smiled gently. "You're so brave, Vivian," she said, her voice full of warmth. "You're so smart." Vivian blinked up at her mother. "I took this from your room, Mommy," she said, pulling a lipstick from her dress pocket. "I drew the smile with it. It made me think of you." The officers exchanged surprised looks, but Nathan couldn't help but smile. "She's a smart girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled the dollar bill from his pocket and held it up for Isabel to see. "Please, officers, I understand this should be evidence, but I'd like to keep it as a memento, a reminder," Nathan said, turning to the officers and Detective Reeves in the room. The police explained they would need to take it for documentation as evidence, but assured him it would be returned. The social worker arrived shortly after, her expression warm yet professional, as she knelt to meet Vivian's eye level. "Hi, Vivian," she said gently. "My name is Margaret, and I'm here to make sure you're safe and to help figure out what's best for you. Would you be okay talking with me for a little while?" Vivian hesitated for a moment, glancing at her mother before nodding. "Okay," she said softly. Margaret offered her a reassuring smile. "Thank you, sweetheart. We'll just chat in that room over there. I'll keep the door open so you can see your mommy. And if at any point you feel uncomfortable, you can tell me, all right?" Vivian nodded again, then let Margaret lead her to the quieter space. Left alone in the waiting area, Isabel exhaled shakily and turned to Nathan, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for everything, for saving me, for helping my family." Nathan met her gaze, his rough exterior momentarily softening. "You don't have to thank me," he murmured. "I didn't do much." But the truth was, he'd done more than anyone else could have. He had become part of their fight, whether he wanted to be or not. The social worker emerged from the room and approached Isabel with a reassuring nod. Her voice was calm yet compassionate as she said, "I'll begin the process of filing for custody right away. With the evidence we have, there's a strong case to restore you as Vivian's legal guardian." Isabel nodded, a wave of relief flooding over her. "And my daughter." "For now, Vivian will be placed under temporary guardianship with supervision," the social worker explained gently. She offered Isabel a reassuring smile. "You will be her temporary guardian, Mrs. Navarro. Don't worry, it's just a formality, but the court should move quickly once we submit everything." Isabel exhaled, relief washing over her. As the social worker began the paperwork, Isabel's gaze drifted to Nathan, her gratitude unspoken but clear. She reached over and placed a hand on his arm. "You've done more for us than you know." Vivian, who had returned to her mother's side, looked at Nathan with sharp, curious eyes. She eyed the burn marks on his cheek, and for a moment, Nathan wasn't sure how to respond. But the little girl's voice broke the silence. "Mommy can fix that. The marks on your face, right, Mommy?" Vivian said softly, tilting her head as she studied Nathan's scars. "I can help." She grinned mischievously, her eyes twinkling with a mix of innocence and determination, as if she were already hatching a plan to make it happen. Nathan raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his face as she turned to Isabel. I'm not sure if your mommy would want to do that." Isabel smiled, her gaze lingering on the burn marks partially hidden beneath Nathan's thick beard. "I can take a look at this in my office," she mused. Then, meeting his eyes, she added warmly, "And I'm willing, Nathan, because you helped us. When someone helps, they deserve a thank you, right, Vivian?" Isabel asked, and Vivian nodded. Her eyes sparkled with both sincerity and excitement as she leaned in slightly. "I'll fix your face," she promised with a playful grin, "and maybe, just maybe, you'll tell me your story one day." Nathan's heart swelled with something he hadn't felt in years, hope. "One day I'll tell you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But for now I think I'll keep the scars. They have a story of their own." Isabel's smile never wavered. "I'll wait for that story," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. Then, tilting her head, she added, "But if you won't let me fix your face, maybe I can thank you in another way." She straightened. "I have an empty apartment. You can stay there," she offered with quiet determination. "And we can work together to get your life back. A journalist or a spy, whatever you choose." She held his gaze, conviction shining through her words. "We can fix it." Nathan stared at her, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment he wondered if this was just a fleeting moment of kindness, or if there was something more here. A chance. An opportunity. He nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "I think I'd like that," he murmured, a small, genuine smile forming on his lips. Then with a chuckle he added, "Though I don't think I can be a spy at my age." Vivian giggled and Isabel smirked. "I'll stick to being a journalist, or maybe a writer," he continued, glancing at them both. "I can start there, telling my stories." Detective Reeves approached them once more, his expression gentler this time. "Isabel," he said, his voice calm, "thanks to Nathan's testimony and the evidence we've gathered, we've established that you were forced into signing over your company. The legal transfer won't stand in court. Novartis Dermaceuticals is still yours." Isabel exhaled sharply, as if releasing a breath she had been holding for far too long. A wave of relief flickered across her face before she straightened her posture, regaining the quiet strength she had always carried. "Thank you," she whispered, not just to the detective, but to Nathan, to Vivian, and perhaps to the universe itself for giving her a chance to fight back. As the police and social worker set the legal proceedings in motion, Nathan watched the scene unfold, his thoughts drifting. Today had been a whirlwind, a story of power, betrayal, and redemption. Yet, what lingered with him the most wasn't the fall of a corrupt man or the reclaiming of a fortune. It was the quiet, resilient love of a mother and daughter, the unwavering courage of a child, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. Perhaps, he thought, life wasn't just a collection of lost things and unfinished chapters. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a story worth writing, one where he too had a place. As Nathan sat quietly, watching the officers and social worker move through the process, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. His past had led him to this unexpected moment. He had helped someone. Maybe that's what mattered most now. He wondered about his future, about what might come next. For the first time in a long while, the fog that had clouded his mind seemed to lift. Maybe it wasn't too late for him to start again, to find a way back to the life he had once dreamed of. And for the first time in a long time, Nathan felt a spark of hope, small but undeniable.